Well, good day, everyone. My name is Matthew Storm. I'm the CX evangelist here at USAN, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's webinar, Banking on CX Data, Maximizing Growth in Financial Services. And I'm really excited, and thank you for taking the time for joining us today for this exciting webinar. We have a great session for you today. We're going to have this as a very open session with lots of Q&A. And again, always, if you have a question, you can use the chat and Q&A boxes. Our agenda is going to go through just some introductions of our guest speaker. We're going to talk a little bit about the role that various customer experience touch points, analytics, cross-selling and upselling, of course, the role of AI. We have to talk about AI. It wouldn't be a webinar in 2024 without that. But I think the follow-up to that is also then how do we roll out things like analytics and AI whenever there are some technical and legacy constraints that we're all aware of in this industry. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today. Jonathan Allen is with AWS. Our speaker joined AWS in 2017 as the Director of Enterprise Strategy, and he works with enterprise executives around the world for their experiences and strategies and how to move to the cloud to increase speed and agility and devoting more of their resources to their customers. He has worked with hundreds of FSI or financial service institutions like yourself, helping them successfully complete migrations and transition their organizations to help them realize the full benefits of AWS. Including working with many of the world's leading brands, he's also a frequent speaker, keynoting at over 300 events at his tenure at AWS, and is even a co-author of a book, Reaching Cloud Velocity. Prior to that, our speaker, Jonathan, spent 17 years working as a leader at Capital One Bank, and he worked with them globally in multiple roles, and his final role was the divisional CTO for the UK, and was part of the technology team that selected AWS and was accountable for architecting, engineering, and execution of their migration of those applications for the bank. So welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matthew, for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let's jump right into the conversation. I think that today's conversation is an important one because while there's all this buzz about, how can we use AI and how can we use AI, I think let's start with the conversation more around the customer experience data that we already have today. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, for decades, all of the data that we have about our customers in our industry here help guide decisions and customer preferences, loyalty, wallet share, all of those things. Even where do we put a new ATM or cash point? But with all of the data that we have, what do you think are some of the major trends in our sector that are driving customer satisfaction?
Personalization is now table stakes for us. Personalization driven by, of course, knowing your customer, machine learning. Every enterprise business aspires to now make data-driven decisions, as you were just saying, Matthew. But this personalization element is now absolutely table stakes for what we're doing, how we're executing it. And look, let's be honest, most enterprises are still trying to get there, right? They're still trying to get to that personalization debate. Many customers I speak to around the world, particularly in the financial services industry space, and I have experiential empathy with this, they often refer to themselves as museums of technology when they're coming to this space, Matthew.
Yes.
I've heard that quote more than once. And very often though, many of these folks are actually drowning in data, or drowning in data, insight poor when they're coming down to this CIX and experience. So they're driving towards this personalization state. They're fighting with their museums of technology. They're fighting with very often both technical and organizational debt of how to execute and bring these touch points to the fore, which fundamentally is this personalization play that we demand actually as consumers, as customers. It's not your competitors which are disrupting you anymore. It's your customer expectations which are disrupting you.
So what do you think is holding them back from maximizing this data?
It's a combination of many things, I find. You look, when we actually as a team looked at sort of three of the things of why folks fail to win, and we looked at some of the data behind it, it came down to sort of three things. The first one is fundamentally most enterprises are still operating in an industrial model, not a model for today. They're actually still executing in silos within their organization. Their data is still within silos. They are not moving towards business outcome teams that can deliver on an outcome where these teams can build, support, and iterate. So the first problem is these silos that they're stuck in. The second issue we see is leadership principles are actually still dictating us towards that siloed business function fundamentally. That's a real problem. And so hold on, we actually had to look at some of the top business schools in the world and their MBA programs, and many of the principles they're still teaching in there relate to the industrial revolution from 100 years ago, not what we're going through right now. And then finally, the third thing we see fundamentally is reskilling.
Mm.
There's still a skills lag. There's still a propensity for organizations to not get their resource mix in the right way, in the right form for their teams to build, support, and iterate on the things that matter to them. And almost a misunderstanding of when they need to build, when they need to buy, when they need to use, and when they need to invest. And leadership teams, really, all of these four things conflate together to make it really hard to go, well, what should I be doing? And I have a strong grain of empathy with them. When I was at Capital One before, when I was building on premises technology, it was a really good reason why we had functional silos of technical expertise. There was a really good reason why I had a voice team looking after my contact center technology, because there was a lot of technology we had in our data centers at that point supporting this technology medium. And you know what? It was hard. Like if you think of all the methods, just when we're talking about customer experience touch points for a voice contact center, we put aside the other channels for a second. I was dealing with legacy ACD, a call routing platform that needed continual upgrades, dialing technology that really was very old, call recording software technology, CRM interface touch points. The list goes on and on and on. And you're actually spending an awful lot of resource just to stand still there. So you put those four things together with that, I'm trying to run just to stand still. And there's a lot going on here of why folks struggle to get to those insights.
Absolutely. Uh, it reminds me one time a journalist asked me, "Don't you think customer service is just getting worse?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. It's gotten harder. It's not worse. I think of all of the touch points that make life easy for me as a customer of my bank, from the mobile app to a website, and things that are super easy to do. I mean, but when something really goes wrong, it's usually something very beyond self-service that I do need to speak with someone. So with all of the touch points from self-service to, a human helping me do a task, how do you see savvy institutions personalize these experience and maximize each touch point?
I mean, that's a great question. I think those that are doing it well are being deliberate about it.
Hmm.
And I think there's a real discipline around focus. Let me give you an example of one of the AWS customers. So if you look at Monzo in the UK, very deliberate experience around a channel, which of course is their mobile app. Now, interestingly for them, even though they've got 5 million customers, no website. So an
Wow.
entire channel that they're not actually using. They're deliberately focusing on mobile and that channel to be really good. No branches, no strategy. Now that focus gives them something very valuable. And then, of course, when you do have something go wrong and you need to speak to an agent, and of course, you're doing everything you can in the touch point, in the UI to make sure that that customer can get the answers they want through to focus, to the UX design. But when they do get through to an agent, you want that to be as an informed and, if for want of a better term, almost an escalatory agent, somebody who is super skilled and able to quickly sort me out. And we know elements like right party connect, average handle time, screen pop and splash, all of these can make a huge difference. And it needs focus to pull them together. I think when people say I'm pursuing this omni-channel strategy, and some customers have had success with that, but focus is super important, I'm finding.
Hmm, that is true. Focus is important. Um, One of the focuses that I see in a lot of banks is that correct mix of cross-selling and upselling, and
Mm-hmm.
using these experiences from to say maybe this person should be in this, you have this product or this service. How are companies using all of this CX data and analytics or even AI to find that correct mix without feeling like it's this, massive sales machine and it's, just I'm upsold all the time?
Well, there's a very delicate balance in there. I think we've all seen as customers when the upsell is too harsh, too incorrect, and it becomes a negative customer experience. So again, balance is really, really important here. Of course, it's probably we're going to bring in Gen AI now into the conversation to answer that question, because one of the things from the personalization that we're seeing, and one of the big challenges that is now finally being solved, is the making life easier for the customer agent and thus making the experience better for the customer who's on the end of this experience. And, Matthew, one of the intractable problems, certainly when I was a CTO and ran the technology behind very large contact centers, one of the intractable problems has been contact center adherence.
Hmm.
So for those of us that, have lived with this dilemma, in the worst cases, you've have customers who will hire agents, train them for up to 3 months, and then that agent starts the job and goes, no, too hard. And you've paid them for 3 months by this point, and they've left. Because actually on the end of a complicated customer product are complicated customer queries, which take a lot of expertise for an agent to handle. So in your answer, that simple question you said of how are we making this easier, what trends are happening right now, what we're finally seeing is to be able to take highly curated written language, and in this case we're going to use English. English is a language. Very often those same training materials you spent 3 months training that agent on, to then use them with a large language model that's appropriate, with the right speed, the right price. Of course, the security is the biggest focus from Amazon Web Services, but to then use retrieval augmented generation to supplement the prompts for that large language model. And that retrieval augmented generation prompting now coming from that highly curated, training material to listen in to prompt the agent while a call is happening, and the LLM's able to listen to both what's being said from the customer and being said to what's happening by the agent, and then to real-time agent assist, real-time provide agent prompting. That is having a major difference. That is having a major impact with customers, and for the first time, we're seeing real changes on contact center adherence. So look, that is radically changing how you're going to get to a better service proposition. You've got to make it easier for the agents. For any of those that have ever done agent listening, as I have, and I'm sure you have, Matthew, very confidential topics are discussed on these. So security is absolutely paramount. But then if you can get it working, and what we're seeing for those financial service customers that are working with us in our innovation lab, and there are many, many of them, they're starting to have real breakthroughs in this topic. And the impact just isn't on, hey, I've had a better experience or I've answered that question. Of course, that's huge. That's huge for things like Net Promoter Score. What you're now seeing is real reductions in agent handle time, real reductions in first party connect and first party to handle the call. So these are what matters in actually servicing it. And yeah, I'm going to stop there. But that's what I'm saying right now. That's what I'm saying right now, Matthew.
Yeah, and if an agent in our call center wants to come to work because we're not just like a shotgun approach to upselling and everyone gets offered the same plan and the
Yep.
same life insurance upsell or the same financial
It's got
advisor.
to be personalized.
It does, and it makes a difference. I think even for the employee who offers them, I don't want to be rejected every time. if there's something personalized, that's giving me confidence that what I'm about to offer this person on the phone is that's huge.
That's huge.
As I think about these, I will say, the chat line is open. So if you're attending today and you have a question for Jonathan, just send it here in the chat. Send it directly to me or use the Q&A feature. We'd love to keep taking your questions. I will say, we made it 17 minutes without, well, you did say
I
LLM,
mentioned it.
so I guess we did say
Large language model,
we
yeah.
did go Gen AI already, all right? So with all of the data that's there to ingest and the governance of it, how does a bank create a use case for one or two or three or 30 or ways to take AI and then, let's say, turn that into something that is the right data to the right customer at the right time, and it's not just an excuse to say that we did AI.
You got to pick a real problem.
Hmm.
Pick a real problem. And what I'm finding when I'm talking to leadership teams, talking to chief operating officers, they are intellectually curious, but are looking to pattern match to find a problem. In the world of financial services, you know, all new activities have tremendous scrutiny upon them. You of course you want to drive something that drives shareholder value. You of course want to do something that saves money. You of course need to do things that are compliant. And if you're doing all three things, that's super important. You're going to get funded, probably. But you've got to pick that problem to work backwards from. So having a problem like contact center adherence, like improving the agent experience, like being able to offer an appropriate personalized upsell to the customer at the right time matters. And you've got to pick that one problem. And I really would say, do not boil the ocean here. Pick a problem and work on it. And know going in that a lot as powerful as the large language models are right now, as I'm sure they're going to keep maturing, there are positives and downsides that you've got to address carefully right now. Huge positives. And then the other things such as hallucinations. People have heard these, that if it doesn't know the answer, is it going to make one up? You've got to have a mechanism in a regulated environment to understand how to handle those. So a couple of the mechanisms I'm seeing, Matthew: when am I going to put a human in the loop? When am I not going to put a human in the loop? Now, I think one of the great candidates we're seeing, first of all, is humans being in the loop, such as a trained agent being assisted by an agent assist. Interesting. A human in the loop, if the agent prompts something and the human can go, no, that's not right, then they can correct it. Secondly, upselling. Again, using personalization to make the right upsell at the right time is going to improve your efficacy. It's going to improve your margin. It's going to improve your customer experience. And also what we're seeing now in the last 6 months is a way to address these hallucinations, with a few caveats. And I'll give you one example. Within Amazon Bedrock, which has got over 10,000 customers, Bedrock being the only serverless generative AI solution at the present time, a large choice of large language models, including the Claude 3 family, Sonnet, Opus, and Haiku, all with different flavors. Being able to choose the right large language model with your right data. And you heard me talk about bringing and using retrieval augmented generation. So bringing your curated natural language to the party to assist that agent. Well, one of the things we've done to make that simple, to remove some of the heavy lifting. And by the way, the heavy lifting when you're doing this process is normally using an embeddings model to break down the semantic reasoning of your retrieval augmented generation content that you want to use. Then using an embeddings model to do that, and then storing it in a vectorized database so that the relationships between the words are ready to go. It's going to be more context specific as you want it to respond and make a richer prompt into the LLM to assist that contact center agent. Now, when we've spawned knowledge bases to help remove that, we can now show content attribution flag as well in the agent assist prompt. So I've just had this agent assist prompt come in. It's showing me something to help the customer through that call. Where did that come from? Well, now with content attribution, it can now give you the route to the PDF document that caused the LLM to answer that. So the human in the loop can go, well, that's interesting. I've seen it's now told me to sell this product, or this rate has changed, or this is how we handle this particular situation. I can now click on a URL and instantly go to the PDF of, the agent training manual of how to handle the situation, because content attribution is now available to me. And this is how you can start to manage some of the previous downsides to using retrieval augmented generation with Bedrock in a regulated space.
Hmm. So I do have a question here. Steve wants to know, is a chatbot that's using Gen AI and call deflection a good first use case? So call deflection, digital self-service,
Yep. Look,
Gen AI?
absolutely. I
Okay.
think the slight reticent, the slight sort of hesitance rather for me is we've seen chatbots succeed and we've seen them fail in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
So I think there's a little bit of some almost natural hesitancy to use chatbots. Now, you absolutely can do them. They have become phenomenally richer. We've also seen them go wrong. In the right situation, a chatbot that is completely automated, doesn't have that human in the loop, may well be the right situation. Maybe they're trying to get help. But if you're using some sort of interacting booking service, maybe it's an escalated call, maybe you're going to use that human in the loop just to make sure. We can't be telling the customer something which isn't true or appropriate. Let's put a human in the loop. Let's make them better, though, at what they're doing.
Very good. Well, I know one of the things that we do as an Amazon partner is, help people just accelerate and keep up with the pace of all of this. Um, what are some advice? What are some pieces of advice that you would give to someone that is afraid that they're not going to be able to keep up when it comes to AI and generative AI? What advice would you give them?
That's a great question, and a very real challenge for all of us who are trying to keep pace in this situation. And this advice that I say is pretty consistent when I say this. There's an expectation now as a leader that you are going to be cognizant of the world around you, that you are well read. You need to find the right habit to keep up. Like, what are you going to do? And it's tough. As a CTO, I was busy from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., back to back, sometimes with double and triple bookings, running from crisis to fire. I am not going to find 2 hours to do something in that time. Like, it's not going to happen. So
Hmm.
you've got to find a mechanism, I'm finding, on how you are going to upskill. Like, one of the things I do after I've been to the gym in the morning, I sit down for my breakfast. I'm not good in the mornings anyway, Matthew. My wife's very familiar with this. Like, I will actually watch a 30-minute YouTube video. And if you look back at just the Amazon reInvent conference from November last year, reInvent being our global gathering in Las Vegas, we have about 50,000 attendees, 2,000 sessions. Well, of those 2,000 sessions, there might be 5 killer sessions on the role of CX in an AI. Well, I need to be searching for those. I need to be bookmarking them on YouTube. I need to be downloading them to whatever device I use. They need to be available to me. I need to be watching them. And literally, what I do is I will sit down after reInvent, probably a week after they've been published, and I will search through those sessions looking for what I want to do. And I tried to search for about 200 videos, and I'll literally tag them, put them into my library, and every day I'm watching one of them throughout the whole year. Sometimes I will 2x the speed of them. I'm like, yeah, that's not interesting. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, I need to really focus on what was just said because this is super deep and interesting.
Hmm.
And that's how I'm doing it. So I think each person's got to find their own mechanism, and there's some real diamonds in there. The one that I love is when the customer on stage talking about their use cases, and especially when they find and share their lessons learned, because none of us wanted to walk into mistakes that other people have already been made. We want to walk over those. So find that mechanism that works for you to deliberately rescale, build it into your day. If you've read the book Atomic Habits, understand what the cue, the action, and the reward is for you. Build a habit around that learning. For me, it's my breakfast routine. That's where I get a little bit of, I need to sit down, coffee, and just digest this, and that's my learning moment.
Very nice. Yeah, I do the same thing. I love the recorded sessions from reInvent. I also love at reInvent. when I'm there in person. Just this last December, like sometimes running up to the stage to meet the presenter to ask them a question, or running to someone who asked a question, and say, "Hey, I have the same problem," and
Yeah,
then we find out maybe we're, at competing banks or at a competing roles or something.
that's
But
a
people will share, and it's the
that's a
collaboration in this
great
space is just unprecedented, I
yeah,
think.
that running up to presenters afterwards, by the way, that's a very good tip. So, of the dozen or so breakouts I've done at reInvent over the last 7 years, I mean, the two topics I specialize is completing large scale migrations and modernizations. There's normally a queue of 12 customers waiting to speak to my presenter and my co-presenter and I,
Mm,
and the other customers are listening in, and they normally have very similar questions that they learn from each other, and
absolutely.
go and network, make that contact, ask questions, ask for a briefing with Amazon. We will share under NDA everything we can and are allowed to do so.
Yeah. So, what advice on this topic would you give to someone that says, my CEO just asked me, can we do this with AI? And my CTO just asked me, could we do this with ATI? And the VP of the call center just pushed me to do that. Um, how do I build a sandbox of innovation, if you will, where I feel safe that I can try some things, again, and get that innovation as quickly as possible, but know that at the same time, I'm still working in a museum, right? I think so. Using the
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah. It's the prioritization that you're going through when you're running any sort of customer experience in any enterprise is relentless. And I know you wanted to come onto this a little bit, towards the end here, Matthew, but there is a ton of stuff going on in this museum of technology, typically in an enterprise that they're trying to get through. You're trying to simplify. You're trying to move the needle. You've got compliance projects, you've got value add projects, you've got vendors, you've got, your personnel, your team around you that you're working on. I would always say when people come at you with those three or four things, your answer is maybe. You're maybe. Let's pick a real problem. Let's try and pick something that's hopefully going to improve shareholder value if you're a commercial business. Let's pick something that might even save us some money as well. And let's pick something that's going to help us with our regulatory compliance. Like
Mm,
almost go through that in your brain. And that's probably something that's going to make a difference. Nobody cares about science projects. People care about making a tangible business difference. So pick something. Where can you use your curated natural language or a real-time database to assist with something that's going on to improve that customer experience service? You showed me just last week what USAN are doing in some of your examples of how you're helping some of your customers, and that blew my mind. Again, didn't think even that of a use case, Matthew. So I think this pattern matching for executives to go, somebody said we want to do something. Where am I going to hit those three things? And by the way, where am I going to make a bit of space in this that I'm going to do? And that making space thing, I'd like to think Amazon Web Services has a huge part to play in that, because removing that undifferentiated muck of heavy lifting is how you're going to find more space to innovate. I mean, there's a very, very good reason why Amazon Connect is the second fastest growing service in Amazon Web Services history, just behind Amazon Aurora. And that is because it's helping massively simplify the contact center as a service for customers.
mm,
The that museum of technology, when I'm trying to interface my ACD with my call routing, with call recording, with screen recording, with some sort of CRM integration, dealing with 6 different vendors, dealing with a plethora of on-premise services, dealing with my telco, dealing all, and by the way, all of this stuff is continually changing, continually being patched. That's a lot of muck when suddenly you go, hey, can we do a Gen AI project now? Like,
right.
you're fighting a lot of this all the time. So that ability to move to a simplified service where you get call recording as a click enable within it, the ability to bring in these supplementary services, easier. This is how you're going to actually make some of that space to try more of these bets. And the other thing on when you're trying these bets, you've got to be prepared, and I'd massively encourage you to put together a business outcome team that can spend maybe 2 or 4 weeks iterating on the value of this idea. And if there's no value there, move on. Know when to pivot or persevere on an idea. And You did say something that triggered me a moment ago. How do you get this like innovation lab set up? And I'll speak freely. I'm not a big fan of that.
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of everybody in your enterprise should be empowered to innovate. Innovation doesn't just happen in a lab. Everybody has a role and a part to innovate. And some of the best innovators have come from engineers who are closest to the challenges and have had an idea. And if they can't bring their idea to the senior leadership team and have that tested, they're going to get disengaged. You're not going to hold on to those individuals, whether it's an engineer, whether it's somebody in the CX space, maybe it's a call center agent themselves.
Hmm.
And so you've got to work on freeing up that that horrific prioritization which is going on around the world. Folks are being asked to do so many things now. You just got to make some wiggle room.
Yep. So we had another question come in, and I'm just going to paraphrase it a little bit, but um, sometimes the scariness of AI is that it's like this living and breathing thing that you never know what it's going to do. It's not as simple as if this, then it will do that. How do you monitor and measure the insights to say, okay, this AI project worked or it didn't? When it's this like it's almost improving every day and it's getting better. And how do you stop at one moment and say, this AI project has been a success? How do you do that?
Yeah, you're going to have to develop your own success criteria for this, and you're going to have to develop your own testing criteria for this as well. Those two things are symbiotic, they're not separate. So, what does good look like? And with my error ratio or my hallucinations or even my randomization, what am I doing to mitigate those risks? What am I doing to mitigate them is really important here. So I'll give you one example. For example, if you go and talk to an LLM right now that's configured with default settings, you will get a slightly different answer for every question you ask. Like, why is that happening? Well, it's happening because one of the weightings is randomization.
Hmm.
It's enabled to randomize the answer to be a little bit more personable. You can turn randomization off for many of these LLMs. You can tune it. So that's something you should be doing. Source attribution for retrieval augmented generation, as I mentioned, super important. Is it materially making a difference to your average handle time? Is it materially making a difference to your upsell? Is it materially making a difference to the wellness and well-being of your agents? Is it addressing your net promoter score? These are things you have to try and benchmark in amongst all the noise of the other things you're changing right now, which could give you false positives about what you're doing, to get to a criteria of what is it I'm trying to achieve and how am I managing any of the risks with appropriate mitigation mechanisms.
Hmm. But Jonathan, I live in a world where we say the greeting the same way and we close the call the same way and we tell them to use the same phrases and I have to read this exact script at every credit card. And how do I move from, wow, what you just said that is something is making something random, which to me might be more personal, to an organization, and I will move to the last topic here, is how do I take the legacy constraints of I live in a scripted world, Mr. Allen.
Yep.
I cannot just have this random AI tool giving customers advice about their journey or their customer journey. How do you go about doing that?
Well, the random tool thing, I would disagree with Matthew. Like this, we're making deliberate choices here.
Mm,
But I think that comes back to the culture of the enterprise that's delivering it. And by the way, this C word I always find interesting, culture. Even anthropologists that study culture cannot succinctly describe what it is. I actually prefer what Brian Chesky, the Airbnb CEO, says, where he says culture is a shared way of doing something with passion. So, yes, look, in a regulated environment, many of the scripts they have to say, because the supervisor and the regulator demands it, they
mm,
can seem awfully boring. But some of the best calls I've had when I've been on the end of one of these customer experiences is where the agent almost makes gentle fun of it and says, hey, we've got to do the regulated bit. It protects you, it protects us. Let me just go through this. And when they do that, I'm like, I get it. It protects me, it protects you. Let's do it.
it's
And even
human.
though it's
Yeah.
human, and
Yeah.
that human angle, that's the culture. That's the shared way of doing something with passion. And that is completely set up by the leadership team. And the leadership team they're defining the mission. They're defining the principles by which these people are hired, how they make decisions, and they're sure as heck defining the mechanisms which dictates how they do their job.
Hmm.
So when people say, I've not got the right culture for this, I'm like, hey, look in the mirror. Like, if you're the leader or you're in the C-suite and you are not affecting those three things, then you're not helping this culture, because ultimately speed is an executive choice.
Hmm. So speaking of that, then how do a great question came in here. Jill wants to know, so in a compliance environment, can I make AI be more strict if I need that that to be much more a script like than random or personalized? Is that something that
Again,
AI can be
you
adjusted to
can
do?
tune the randomizations down in many of these large language models, but a lot of it is going to come down to testing. And right now we're at this position where, we're still moving forward, and customers are moving into production, and they've got to make a call whether they put a human in the loop, whether they put a human sometimes in the loop, or they never put a human in the loop.
Hmm.
And I think you've got to understand and come up with the right test criteria on how to measure that and how to manage those potential risks that could emerge. That's how you're going to get to a point where you're starting to feel comfortable that you've got a well-managed generative AI process. And so much of my conversation when I was a CTO, when I was a leader, was really being very candid around the risks of everything. Everyone has their top 10 risks, by the way, whether and cybersecurity is nearly always a customer's top risk. Totally understand that. We're happy to talk security every minute of every day in Amazon Web Services. But when you come down this, have you identified the risks, such as that customer asked the question around, can we, how do we measure this? Well, have you got the right testing criteria in place? Have you got the ability for any of your customer center agents to pull an and-on cord? This idea of an and-on cord, something's gone wrong, I'm going to stop this until somebody takes a look at it from the leadership team. Have you got an and-on cord mechanism in? Do you have a mechanism to mitigate hallucinations? Do you have a mechanism to manage any unwanted bias or profanity coming into these LLMs? One of the things that we've released as part of Bedrock is guardrails for Bedrock. This ability to now go in and set the thresholds on, well, I never wanted to talk about profanity. I never wanted to talk about these topics. We're now starting to introduce that as a mechanism to help you handle this risk. And there's always this balance of, do we get it to a point where it is just an automaton speaking and it's very boring and dull? Or do we humanize it? And I'm a big proponent that you can humanize this while still being compliant.
Yeah. Wow, that's solid advice right there. I think it is possible. And the technology is just budding for that right now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's coming about. So on this last topic of the technical side of things, without being too technical and just thinking more of it as the legacy solutions and
Mhm.
software, on-prem, cloud, everything that we have today, um, how does it, what, just a couple things that you would tell an organization if you're going to overcome some of these legacy tech constraints, what would that advice be?
Yeah, there's a few human things and there's a couple of technical things, and I'll stray on the human things. The worst mistake, the worst mistake I have made in my career as an engineer is optimizing something that should not exist. So before you reach for that upgrade handle to go from version 6 to version 7, before you reach to just, maintain the status quo, just think, does this actually need to now exist? And taking that time to your other question to learn what other customers are doing, to learn what is out there, to learn what's probably more efficient, faster, cheaper, speak to those customers that have done it, get those reference cases, get those lessons learned, and go, holy cow, there's a different way of doing this completely. And before you reach for that optimized lever, just reach for the undifferentiated lifting lever instead and go, there
Mm,
might be a better way of doing this. And by the way, that's really hard because the human element of it, when I was leading engineers who were looking after these voice systems, and I as a leader do this all the time, very often I get, unconsciously comfortable with the status quo.
mm,
This is how it just needs to be. I was dealing with one airline recently who's having a really string of bad IT outages, and they said this is just how it needs to be. And I was like, no, it is not how it needs to be. This is not what good enterprise technology looks like right now. We can help you get to a different place. You know, you want this to be as available as the Amazon.com retail website is. Every time you go, that's there and it loads in seconds. Like that's where we want to get to. We want that sort of response time. We want that in our customer experience. So you've got to strive for your folks to get consciously uncomfortable with there's probably a better way. But the humans in us, the humans in us, they get really comfortable with the level of autonomy in their job. They're really comfortable with the mastery. They're known as the expert in that thing and know what their purpose is. But you've got to understand what the next generation of good looks like so you can continue to have a great career. So that human element of continuing to, look at, do I need to optimize this? Do I need to replace it? And looking at that ecosystem to break through and free up some gosh darn time so that I can look at these cool things, which I think are going to make a difference. But you know what? I'm really busy at the moment. And this stuff is always more complex than people think, particularly in propensity for the voice contact center space. Like some of the technology in there is decades old, as you know, Matthew. And some of the interfaces that we're having to maintain, you're like, wow, this was literally written in the 1970s.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And even some of the CCAS that exists out there today is aging and not aging well. And
No,
I think that's so going back to the title of our today's session, what data you think within an institution today is the most ripe, if you will, to harvest insights and create growth that is coming out of a contact center or out of their customer facing employees? What data do you think is most ripe for that?
it's a very individual question to the individual customer that they've got right now. So it's very unique to the business case, Matthew. I'm going to say, come back to that very first question I said is, have you got your personalization element in the right way? Just today, I was dealing with I was being passed from pillar to post with inside a contact center environment, and they kept losing my security status as I was transferred. So every time it was re-authenticating myself from a security. So, you might think it's revolutionary, but hey, how about fix the fact that, I can pass security once and that's preserved throughout the contact center system. That'd be pretty cool, right? So you talk about the most important data, that there. But on top of that, like what is some of the right personalization elements you're going to bring into the CX to make that conversation really quickly important for the customer and for the agent to get through it? Everything from, what do you know about this customer? What's appropriate for you to use in accordance with the regulations and legal assertions for your industry? Can you use it? Are you using it? Are you making the right decision? Now, we've been doing that for many years in the contact center environment, but what else is now available? What else does generative AI start to bring up? What else, where can I use this corpus of information I might have elsewhere in my business? Where else can I make a real-time data call? A retrieval augmented generation call can also be to a online database store. So I could return a variable now. Where am I storing these variables? Could I see that the customer logged into the mobile app at 4:54 a.m.? Hello, Mr. Allen. I saw you logged in this morning. Is everything okay? That makes a big difference. Suddenly, I'm like, wow, you're really looking. So you've really got to look at what is right for your customer use cases, what is right in your industry, what is the personalization data you've got to make this call useful and time well spent as quickly as possible.
I like that. Well, we've got a little bit more time. I just wanted to open up to our audience as well. If you have additional questions, please again send them here in the Q&A or in the chat window. I see both of those. We have one more question that's still here in queue, and is there a quick win for someone to overcome legacy tech constraints, especially with integrations with those
Yeah.
legacy systems? So it's like
I
a
mean,
system
that's,
I can't get. I'm assuming that the person's asking because we're not getting rid of that system anytime.
yeah. I mean, that's the killer question right there. And that is what has literally tied us in knots for years in this space. I've got to maintain dependency X because system Y is still going to be here for the next 5 years. We cannot even contemplate changing that. And that's now tied my hands on other possibilities. And it can be everything from what's my routing to what's my ACD to what's my CRM to where am I doing call recording, screen recording, how am I verifying permission? Like the list goes on, and I've lived that dream. I've lived that dream. So when it goes, what's a quick way? I'm always like super suspicious of it, Matthew, because it's like, yeah, what is a quick way? I think what you've got to do is inject some of the same adrenaline into the situation we had during the pandemic, all the way back in 2000. I mean, I found it really interesting that we had customers with 32,000 contact center seats suddenly switching over to Amazon Connect in 4 weeks. Like that would normally be a 4-year program, let's be honest, like for any of us that have worked on contact center work. Suddenly what became 4 years was 4 weeks. Why was that? Because they had an impetus to do so. It's going to become very rapidly clear for those that are able to win this personalization CX journey with the right data to be able to increase average and handle time. And you are going to lose customers if you're not competing. So my answer to that question is you've got to find the right problem to solve. You've got to do it with building blocks, which are available, that have proven security, which are cost effective. And of course, I am a strong believer, that's why I work for Amazon Web Services, that the building blocks available to you allow you to test that really quickly, irrespective of the current, for want of a better word, technical dependencies or even handcuffs, as one customer described them to me recently, of what you've got right now. There's got to be other things. And you've got to pick those big things, which are going to make that easier. Like, what's the big thing? What's the big holdup? Before you optimize it, are you doing the right? Does this thing still need to exist? Now, we know that the software is typically the longest pole in this tent, these integrations, the CRMs, the backend data calls. But what else can you do just to give yourself a bit of wriggle room to make more impact earlier?
Well, I appreciate that. And I thank you so much for your insights today. I think you've given us a lot of things to think about. We'll close today's session with that. But again, thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking your time to
Thank you.
spend with us today. I would love to continue this discussion. If you're listening to today's session and you'd like to have maybe a more of a personal question answered around your environment and your organization that isn't right for an open webinar like this, feel free to send me an email. I'm matthew.storm@usan.com. Connect with Jonathan and I on LinkedIn. There's a lot of great things happening in the industry, both from the partner community of AWS and directly with AWS. And it's a great way, like you say, to just stay plugged in, stay connected, attend that next. It's not always TED Talks and happiness. It's many times it's how do I do that? And what is AWS doing in that space? So I would appreciate that. And again, if you'd have those questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. So again, thank you, Jonathan, for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we appreciate you being on the webinar with us today.
Thank you, Matthew.